Ever since my last iceberg video, people have been wanting me to cover different sorts of dinosaur-related icebergs, mainly ones revolving around walking with dinosaurs or carnivore's dinosaur hunter. But ever since the iceberg trend really gained traction, I have been waiting patiently for someone to make an iceberg on Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal. If you don't know what Primal is, it's an animated show that was aired on Adult Swim revolving around a caveman named Spear and a tyrannosaur named Fang, who go on adventures and fights different things in the brutal world that it's set in. There are tons of spoilers in this video, so if you're interested in this show, then maybe don't watch this video first. Just go watch the show instead. Seriously, I highly recommend it. It's actually a really good show. Anyways, after months and months of waiting for an iceberg on this show, it never happened. So I figured if no one else was going to do this, then it was up to me to do it for them. But I needed some help with this, so I decided to reel in my aquatic friend Pish, who also happens to be a primal enthusiast, to help me set up this iceberg, and after a few hours of dicking around, getting distracted, and literally getting nothing done, we got started on the iceberg. And after a couple of more hours, this was the outcome. Now before we go any further, here's a bit of context for those of you who aren't familiar with how iceberg videos work. Iceberg charts are a recent trend in which entries of a specific topic, like video games or movie franchises for example, are taken and put in a list that begins with the most well-known or common things around said topic, and as you go down that list, these entries begin to become more obscure, strange, and even creepy depending on the topic you're covering. There are several different versions of these icebergs all around the internet that literally cover anything you can think of. There's even one that literally revolves around fruit. This is a trend that I've grown very interested in, so much so I ended up making a video on an iceberg that someone had made about Jurassic Park. But unlike that video, the iceberg chart that will be featured today is one that we created on our own. And if you don't know about Primal all that much, it's a rather minimal show, and because of that, a lot of the entries here are things like behind the scenes information, fan theories, random pieces of trivia about the show, and so on. With these entries included, it not only lets us talk about the lesser known things about Primal, but also doesn't make the iceberg feel so empty. Of course, there may be debate as to the placement of the entries we decided to put on the iceberg and whether or not they should be on the iceberg at all. Please keep in mind that the decision for the placement of the entries and the decision to add certain entries within the iceberg are simply decisions we made based on our own personal opinions. We spent a long time deciding where they should be placed and also wanted to include stuff we wanted to talk about. If you want to debate either of these two things in a civil fashion in the comments below, that's perfectly fine with us. Besides that, fucking deal with it. Anyways, let's get into the video. The first thing we have on our list is the show's first real enemy to our main characters. The trio of Red Rexes first appear in the beginning of the first episode and are responsible for the death of Spear's family. After collecting food for his family, Spear makes his way back home only to hear their screams from a distance. He tries to get to them as quickly as he can, but right as he gets there, he witnesses the pack brutally devouring his whole family. We see the pack again when they try to attack Fang and her offspring, but with the help of Spear, the two manage to kill the entire pack and prevent the offsprings from being eaten by them. But then the Alpha Rex shows up and devours the baby Rexes. After more fighting though, Spear and Fang do eventually take her down as well. The main features from the T-Rex pack, besides their red color schemes, are the horns that differentiates each individual Rex. The pack themselves are incredibly hostile and seem to just attack, kill, and eat anything that they come across. What differentiates the pack from the Alpha Rex, besides her own uniquely shaped horn, is her massive size. Aside from these features though, there doesn't seem to be anything too unique about these guys. That being said, they were a great way to introduce the audience to the kind of brutality that we would see in the rest of the show. The snakes are the main enemies in the second episode of the season, but in many people's opinions, it's one of the more lackluster ones. In most of these episodes, you'll notice that the main enemies are unique, or have unique features, or have specific motivations for wanting to kill Spear and Fang. But in the second episode, the snakes are just kind of there. While Spear and Fang try to overcome certain obstacles of their newfound friendship, they run into an ocean of snakes, and when a flood eventually engulfs the area, including our two characters, they then have to kill off a mega snake, which ends up getting killed off screen, so nothing too exciting there. The most I could say about the snakes that might even be remotely interesting is that I think they're supposed to be titanic boas, but besides that, there's not much to say about them.
Next up, let's talk about another group of antagonists that appeared in episode 1 of the second part of the first season, the Scent of Prey. I'm of course referring to the Wild Dogs, who tried to sink their teeth into both Spear and an injured Fang throughout the course of the episode. And while the pack of canines don't seem to have much going in terms of iconicness or impact, there's a lot more to them than meets the eye. First up, the Wild Dogs' designs. Now at first glance there isn't anything too special here, with simple greys, browns, and blacks making up their palettes, with some spooky blood red eyes to top it off. The designers were clearly inspired by African wild dogs, also called painted wolves. And this in turn made me think of these creatures called Dholes from the video game Far Cry Primal. The game is set in 10,000 BC, and also features a caveman who similarly has animal companions and likes to get into brutal bloody fights a lot of the time. Now the Dholes, as they are called in the game, also look just like African wild dogs and hunt in large packs. They are even confirmed to be based on the extinct subgenus of canine, Xenocyon. I know that it's a bit of a stretch to say that the wild dogs in Primal are based off the Dholes from Far Cry, but you have to admit the resemblance is there. Moving on from the design aspect, there was also originally going to be an additional scene featuring the dogs that ended up being cut in the Scent of Prey. However, we do have access to how the scene would have played out via the animatic pitch of the episode. The scene would have shown 3 wild dogs entering the cave, as Spear originally left the entrance open, allowing them to attempt an attack on Fang. This would result in one of the dogs being killed by Spear, who would do what he does best by impaling it with his weapon of the same name. The scene would end with the partners in crime enjoying some meat from the dog's carcass. We obviously don't know why this scene was cut from the episode, but I think it would have been a good scene to show the bond our 2 main characters have made over the course of the show. So yeah, in summary, there's a lot more to the Wild Dogs than you might have expected, and I even think it would be cool if they see a return to the show sometime in the future, as they're one of the only groups of antagonists to survive a battle against Spear and Fang and live to tell the tale. Super interesting nonetheless. The Mammoth Matriarch is one of the most interesting antagonists we've gotten throughout the course of the show. Spear and Fang encounter the Matriarch and her herd in the episode A Cold Death as they attempt to take revenge on the pair in favor of their fallen brethren. But the reason why the Mammoth Matriarch is so interesting is because of the resolution at the end. Unlike every other episode where we get our main characters disposing of a threat either by spearing it, biting it in half, spearing it, beating it to a pulp, spearing it, burning it alive, spearing it, the episode ends with Spear offering the elderly mammoth's tusk to the Matriarch as a show of respect and gratitude, and also as a way to bail them out of what might have been a fatal confrontation. And the episode actually ends with the Matriarch acknowledging this act and leaving the 2 in peace, only to return to a vast mammoth graveyard with the tusk. And that's why this episode is so interesting. It's one of the only ones that doesn't end in more blood being spilled. I also think the fact that the episode revolved around the mammoths and a caveman coming to a peaceful resolution is a big deal and a good message. After all, we were the ones who drove these amazing creatures to extinction in the first place, and they should deserve our respect.
On April 1st of 2020, a Primal episode had been aired completely out of nowhere. For context, back in October 2019, Primal had aired 5 episodes, with the 5th one ending on a massive cliffhanger. Without going on too much of a tangent as to what happens in that episode, it ends with Fang unconscious and presumably near death, with Spear desperately trying to wake her up. It's an extremely emotional scene, and it ends before we could get a definitive answer on Fang's critical states. Then the show went on a 1-year hiatus, with 5 more episodes being planned for the rest of the season to air a year later in October of 2020. So from there, it was a waiting game to see whether or not Fang managed to pull through. But all of a sudden, fans had been given an unexpected but exciting surprise, and that came in the form of a random episode of Primal that aired on April 1st of 2020. At first, some thought that this was the show's official return, but there was a problem. Technically, this is the 6th chronological episode of Primal in terms of being aired, yet in this episode it features Fang in it completely fine. There's no explanation or instance of her healing process anywhere within the episode, and it's almost as if they had completely glossed over the massive cliffhanger from the previous episode. And when people saw this, they began to suspect that it was either possibly a spin-off episode from the main storyline, or maybe it was aired out of order as a prank on the viewers for April Fools. And as it turns out, the episode had been aired out of order. The episode was called The Plague of Madness, and it featured a sauropod becoming infected by a viral disease that we will discuss later in the iceberg. Seeing how at the time we were in the middle of the pandemic, people suspected that this was possibly one of the reasons why this particular episode was aired out of order from the rest, but eventually the rest of the episodes aired in October later that year, revealing Plague of Madness to actually be the 7th episode in the season. Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal Tales of Savagery is a Primal movie, but not the kind you'd think. When a list of 32 movies were announced to possibly get nominated for the Oscars in the category of Best Animated Feature, Genndy Tartakovsky's Primal was on that list. This was rather unusual because to qualify as an animated feature, you had to be an animated movie, and to be a movie, you had to have a runtime of at least 40 minutes. And Primal was neither. At this point in time, Primal was a 5-episode series with each episode being around 20 minutes long. So to be able to qualify for this list, Adult Swim had submitted a version of Primal called Tales of Savagery that retold the first 4 episodes in the season in a way that felt more like an anthology movie rather than a limited series. Because of this, the runtime requirements were met and Primal was officially on the list for movies to possibly get nominated for an Oscar. But unfortunately, Primal was not selected for the nomination, and even though Adult Swim had said that they didn't plan on giving this version a wide release, you can buy or rent a digital copy of it on at least YouTube from what I've seen.
Okay, let's talk about the Ape Men Arena Champion from the episode Rage of the Ape Men. Now, I'm sure many of you already have a general gist of how this guy is thrown into the plot. He's first introduced in the arena with his fellow ape men who proceed to duke it out hard. He ends up being victorious, granting him the honor of choosing a Triceratops skull helmet and drinking a drop of the ape shaman's black substance to prepare him for his battle with Fang, who he nearly beats to death if it weren't for Spear's intervention via ripping off his arms like Jax from Mortal Kombat. In summary, he's your standard run-of-the-mill antagonist of the episode along with the other ape men. But what you might not know is that the Ape Men Arena Champion actually has a canon name that is listed in the cast at the end of the episode, coming in the form of Krog. Due to Primal being a mostly dialogue-ridden show, cough cough Slave of the Scorpion, the name Krog was never directly spoken in the episode. But I personally think that giving this guy's name that small amount of recognition is appreciated and makes Krog feel more like a character rather than another creature for Spear and Fang to have a beatdown with. The Mega Spider for me is easily one of the coolest and scariest obstacles that Spear and Fang have ever faced. Like, if your pet Tyrannosaur can't take down a spider, you know you're in for a bad day. Armed with its massive size, horrific jaws, and a web shooter protruding from its mouth instead of its butt, this arachnid was a terrifying force that would have ended up killing Spear if it weren't for Fang having a big brain moment and learning to play dead. But what if I told you that the Mega Spider was originally going to possess an additional ability that would have made it all the more terrifying? In the animatic pitch of the episode, when the Mega Spider first confronts Fang, it begins to radiate a high-pitched sound from its mouth, described by the narrator as a kind of hypnotizing hum, which causes Fang to become drowsy. The way it's described sounds kind of like Jigglypuff singing from Pokemon, except instead of drawing on Fang's face with a permanent marker, the spider would then proceed to shoot out its webs for a surprise attack. Like a lot of the other scrap content, there's not much context given to why this was cut in the first place, but it definitely would have made the Mega Spider even more scary than it already is, and that's saying something.
In their early development stages, each episode of Primal obviously had their own pitch meetings, or animatics if you will. And because these were just early sketches of the episodes, obviously they didn't have any sound or anything in them. So to fill in that gap, Genndy Tartakovsky presented the animatics by summarizing the events of what was going on as they played. And not only did he do this, but he also covered the sound effects for them as well, which is 100% the best parts of these animatics. Here are a couple examples of what I mean.
Let's go, it falls down. All the other dinosaurs look. He's rumbling through, he's becoming crazed.
This has to be my favorite thing in the world right now. It's just so fucking funny. What makes the animatics this far down the list is due to some of the things that they hold. Some of these animatics show dinosaurs and creatures that didn't make it into the final cut, minor scenes here and there that were cut out as well, and early designs of some of the animals that look different from the ones we see in the final cut. A lot of these changes were pretty minor though, but there are some that we found so interesting we made them their own entries here on the iceberg. We'll go more in depth with those changes as we get to them. This one's pretty self-explanatory, and honestly not all that surprising. Seeing how Genndy Tartakovsky also created Samurai Jack, it only makes sense that the fan base would try and connect the two shows in an attempt to conclude that they're both within the same universe. If you don't know what Samurai Jack is, it's also an animated show that Genndy Tartakovsky created, and it was aired on Cartoon Network and was aimed to be more kid-friendly, with the exception of its final season, which had aired on Adult Swim. The show itself revolves around a samurai that is trying to liberate his kingdom from the power of the show's main enemy, enemy, Aku, who is a shape-shifting demon. One connection from these two shows that I've seen is how the black ooze from episode 5 is similar to the black ooze from that of Samurai Jack's main villain, Aku. However, I'm not really a good enough source to tell you whether or not this theory is solid, as I didn't watch Samurai Jack all that much when I was younger. What I can tell you though is that given Tartakovsky's overall intentions with Primal, it doesn't seem like he's trying to actively connect the two universes as one, and anything that could be seen as a possible link between the two shows is either a coincidence or a reference.
If you watch Primal, you're most likely familiar with Genndy Tartakovsky, the guy who made it. I mean, his name is literally in the show's title, like how could you miss it? But yeah, Genndy has made a lot of other cool shows over the years, such as Samurai Jack. But he's also the creator of a popular cartoon show from the 90s called Dexter's Laboratory, which explores the idea of a young super genius called Dexter who whips up gadgets and gizmos in his lab throughout the course of the series. In one episode called Old Flame, Dexter creates a time machine and brings back the caveman who discovered fire from prehistoric times, proceeding to show him the joys of the 21st century. However, there's something very interesting about this caveman in the way that he looks, in that his design bears a striking resemblance to another caveman from another one of Tartakovsky's shows. So yeah, just looking at these two, it's clear that the Dexter's Lab caveman greatly influenced Spear's final design in Primal, and it acts as a nod to one of Tartakovsky's best works. There's even another much more direct nod to this that comes in the form of a 15-second bumper on Adult Swim, the channel that Primal airs on. Now if you don't know what a bumper is, it's a 15-second clip that plays before a show starts on Adult Swim, and they've been an iconic element of the TV channel for around 20 years now. In this specific bumper, we get Spear animated in a more cartoonish Dexter's Lab style, coming through a time machine, proceeding to make his way around the laboratory, and end the clip by pressing a button that lights up the Adult Swim logo. Another thing to note is that this isn't the only Primal bumper that appeared on the channel. There's a whole host of them that aired at different times, all in different styles. One is animated in a Disney style, there's a cute Flintstones reference with Spear being locked out of his cave by Fang, and there's one where the two are just screaming at each other, which is oddly hilarious. But yeah, for those who have never watched Primal on Adult Swim, these bumpers may come as a surprise, and I hope we get to see more of them when Season 2 starts to air at some point in the future. So yeah, this next one's a bit of a mixed bag, and I mean that because now we're talking about the scientific accuracy behind many of the creatures. And I know the thought of that might totally flip some people's biz, because Primal is pretty famous for being an extremely inaccurate representation of the prehistoric world, due to it being set in a fantastical prehistoric setting rather than a realistic one. But we're not here to talk about the many inaccuracies the show has in store, because 1, we'd be here all day, and 2, who even cares about an insanely graphic show about a caveman and a dinosaur being inaccurate in the first place? It's pretty clear that Genndy and the Primal team don't care too much about that stuff and just want to show us the wonders and horrors of the way our protagonists in this savage world. But that being said, this doesn't mean that scientifically accurate representation isn't in the show at all. Far from it, in fact. There are many scenes and characters that pay homage to or reference modern paleontology and science, mainly coming in the form of the humanoid characters, including Spear and the sacrificial ginger from Coven of the Damned, the albino caveman from Terror Under the Blood Moon, the ape men from Rage of the Ape Men, the tool-brandishing monkey guys from Slave of the Scorpion, and lastly, Mira. The special thing about each of these humanoid characters has to do with each respective group being based on a real-life hominid, such as the ape men resembling and possibly being designed around Australopithecus. Each of these hominids will be covered in more detail in their respective segment, so stay tuned for that, as it's actually pretty cool to dissect some of the design aspects behind these guys to determine which of our prehistoric ancestors were the inspiration for them. Hey, I remember the monkey caveman from Terror Under the Blood Moon, mostly from this funny meme template, but that's besides the point. These guys are actually the first in the long list of alternate human-like characters we see besides Spear and his family. Being portrayed as much more primitive and ape-like than Spear is, they all have bleached, ragged hair, large sunken-in eyes, and very pale, almost albino-ish skin. They're also referred to as ancient monkey-looking cavemen in the Terror Under the Blood Moon animatic pitch. Taking this quote a little more literally, these guys also sort of resemble the hominid species Homo erectus, which were a species of human that not only predated modern Homo sapiens, but Neanderthals too, aka what Spear is based off of. Because these guys are described and shown as being more primitive than Spear, it's not too far-fetched of a conclusion to say that they were based off Homo erectus. Also, real quick, another big mystery that's left unanswered in this episode was who was responsible for making the freaky-looking stone pillars and skull carvings that Spear and Fang come across early on. And due to the way the primitive cavemen act, I would say it's unlikely that it was their doing. But yeah, after watching our dynamic duo take down their bloodbath adversaries, I hope that these dudes finally developed enough common sense to at least try and find a new place to live instead of constantly having to hide under rocks. I mean, come on, look at how hunchbacked they are. They're definitely gonna need a spinal surgeon at some point down the line.
The man-bats are the red dinosaur-sized bats that show up in episode 4 of the first season. Besides their immense size and grotesque facial features, the other notable thing about them is that they seem to have a symbiotic relationship with the giant spider that features in the same episode. We'll talk about that creature in a second, but the man-bats are quite mysterious, as there is still speculation as to why they're serving the giant spider. Given the relationship we see on screen, it seems that the bats bring back food to the giant spider, and in return she provides them shelter, I guess. According to Genndy Tartakovsky, the spider is supposed to serve as a sort of fridge for the bats, I guess using her webs as a way to store and preserve their food in. The bats hunt around the surrounding areas near their cave where they capture their prey and take them back to the cave where they are then dealt with by the giant spider. The bats' prey varies from things as small as the monkey-looking cavemen that were mentioned earlier to as big as full-on dinosaurs. Overall, the man-bats are absolutely terrifying and help contribute to the show's first dive into a horror-related episode. The Mega Spider is the second enemy that shows up in episode 4 alongside the man-bats. The Mega Spider, as the name implies, is a massive spider that dwells inside a high cave and seems to serve as a sort of outlet in preserving any food that the man-bats bring in. As mentioned earlier, the relationship between the bats and the spider isn't 100% clear, so I can't tell for sure if that's the true purpose of their alliance. But this was said by Tartakovsky during the episode's pitch meeting, although things from the final product have been known to change from their early development stages, so who knows if this still holds up. Regardless of that, there does seem to be some sort of attachment between the bats and the spider, because shortly after the spider is introduced, Spear and Fang fight it off and eventually kill it by impaling its head with a severed triceratops horn. After they kill the spider, they make their escape in time for the flock of man-bats to return and find the mega spider dead. Once they realize this, the way they react is quite interesting. They seem completely distressed about the mega spider's death and go after Spear and Fang after making this discovery. By the way they reacted, it's almost as if they had lost something close to them. Maybe this is them realizing they no longer have a way to preserve the food they always bring in? Or did the mega spider serve a greater purpose to them? Maybe it served as a queen of some sort? I guess we'll never really know for sure. Lula was a part of the Witch Coven in episode 7, Coven of the Damned. Lula ends up being one of the few characters within the show that actually empathizes with Spear and Fang's losses. During the episode, there is a scene in which Lula uses her witch powers to stop time completely, and time travels back to when Spear lost his family to the Red Rex Pack. She does the same for Fang, witnessing both of our main characters losing their families, to which she reacts in a way that's surprising to us as the audience, since a lot of the enemies within the show are rather bloodthirsty and terrifying. But Lula seems to genuinely feel bad for our characters. The reason for Lula's reaction is shown to us later in the episode, where she ends up traveling back in time to her own past when she unfortunately lost her own daughter. In this flashback, Lula and her daughter are in the middle of a flower field, and what seems like a pleasant memory at first ends with Lula's daughter falling to her death off a cliff near the field. It is that point in which we can understand why she sympathizes with our main characters, and as a result helps them escape the coven ritual that would follow that evening. Along with her time-stopping abilities, Lula is also able to transform into a crow and hypnotize living things, to which she uses to her advantage to help Spear and Fang's escape. And in the process, she ends up losing her own life, as the head witch, who was clearly not happy with her ritual being interrupted, kills Lula off screen. The episode ends with a very bittersweet moment, as it shows Lula reuniting with her daughter in the afterlife in the same field in which they had their final good memory. This episode fucking sucks for how sad it is, and it's kind of ironic that I say that because it ended up being one of, if not my absolute favorite episode of the season. I think it's because it's just a breath of fresh air that there's an episode that primarily focuses on someone that's not Spear or Fang, and along with that, giving us a perspective of someone that we at first thought was an enemy, only to later find out that that's not the case at all. Overall, I really like Lula's character and the episode itself.
Moving along, let's talk about some cut content that comes in the form of cut creatures. These would have all been animals that would have popped up in specific episodes at some point, but never made it in at the end of the day. The only reason we know about these guys in the first place is thanks to the animatic pitches. I highly recommend checking some of these out, as a lot of them contain various degrees of content that haven't seen the light of day. Anyway, the three majorly scrapped creatures come in the form of Ankylosaurus in Slave of the Scorpion, Dimetrodon in Spear and Fang, and lastly Styracosaurus in Plague of Madness. Much like a lot of the other scrapped content, it is unclear why each of these creatures were missing from the final product. Thinking about it logically, the most appropriate answer would most likely be related to time constraints or the showcase of the animals being unnecessary within their respective episodes. But it would be cool if we got to see each of these guys make a proper debut in Season 2 so we can see them in their full animated glory. Do any of you remember the monkey guys from Slave of the Scorpion? Because I didn't. To me it just seemed like they were shoehorned in for plot purposes, with them kidnapping Mira for some unexplained reason, only to be stopped by Spear and Fang as well as Mira's captors. But the more I look at these guys, the more questions I begin to have. It's interesting because they seem like a mix of the ape men and Spear's race of cavemen, as they obviously look more like apes than humans, but they also use handheld weapons, much like Spear. In the animatic pitch for Slave of the Scorpion, they are referred to as monkey men type dudes, and at second glance this quote could actually be a bit more literal, as the resemblance can also be found in the real-life hominid Homo habilis, the first humans which had monkey-like features. So even though they play such a minor role in the series, it's still cool to know where the inspiration for these guys may have come from, especially if this is supposed to be a reference to the bridge between humans and apes.
As I mentioned before, there's plenty of things that the animatics have that the final products don't. And one of those things are various deleted scenes that were cut before the animation phase of the show. I hesitate to call these scenes though, because a large amount of them are literally just very minor portions that don't even really feel like scenes. Really, a lot of the cut content on here were just very short shots within some of the episodes that were probably just cut due to time. Some of these kinds of shots show up in the animatics and nothing else. For example, one of the beginning shots of episode 1 shows a Dimetrodon running off screen after being briefly shown. Then there's the extended shot of Spear and Fang suspensefully making their way through the long grass while trying to avoid raptors in the episode 4 animatic. And of course, as mentioned earlier, there's the cut portion of episode 6 where Spear manages to kill one of the wild dogs as it was trying to enter the cave to attack an injured Fang. But as far as I'm concerned, there's one deleted scene that actually did make it beyond the animatic stage and onto some sort of animation development stage before being scrapped. And it was a scene in episode 10 that shows Spear and Fang hunting a Calicotherium, with Mira watching them as they eventually kill it. I found this scene on YouTube specifically with no audio, and the scene itself cuts pretty abruptly, so I'm not sure if there was more added on in terms of animation to this scene. And as far as to why the scene itself was cut, I would assume it was due to time as well, although I don't really understand why they would go out of their way to take it this far into development and just decide not to use it. But I will admit the scene itself is pretty short and clearly isn't that important to the episode in any way, so I guess it makes sense for them to cut something like this out. In episode 5, Rage of the Ape Men, we're introduced to a different type of enemy. I know that's not saying much since every episode has a different enemy, but this one is different in terms of how intelligently advanced they are. The Ape Men tribe are a clan of chimpanzee-like humanoids that have their own society. The head of the society comes in the form of an ape shaman, or at least that's what I'm assuming he is. And as important as it sounds, the ape shaman is more of a minor enemy compared to another character that features in this episode that was talked about earlier, Krog. Krog no doubt steals the show with how intimidating and dangerous he looks, especially after drinking the black substance. But the reason why the ape shaman and the ape tribe in general are lower on the iceberg than Krog is simply due to how little we know about them, making them a very mysterious entry. What we do know about the tribe is that they are a race of bipedal, white-coated humanoid apes that seem to capture unsuspecting animals or humans to take back to their coliseum, to which they will force their captives to perform gladiatorial-like battles with other opponents, all for the sake of the tribe's own entertainment. In episode 5, Spear and Fang are forced to fight Krog after Krog finishes off the first round of fighters, which was a group of other larger-sized gorillas. But unlike Spear and Fang, it seems that Krog actually wants to be there and fight. And given by the way Krog acts towards the ape shaman, it gives us a little more insight on how much of a respected figure the shaman is in the tribe. As according to this wiki page about Krog, it mentions that he seems loyal to the ape shaman and goes out of his way to please him. It's not 100% confirmed whether or not Krog is actually a part of this ape tribe or if he was just captured and forced to fight too. But with how he acts towards the ape shaman in mind, it could indicate that he's probably a part of this tribe and wants to earn the shaman's respect. In terms of appearance, what makes the shaman different from the rest of the tribe is the animal fur clothing and the bone jewelry that he wears, along with the staff that he carries with him. He's also the one who's in charge of the fights themselves and rewards the winner of the first round with an advantage to help them with the next round of fighters. And of course, this advantage comes in the form of the black substance that will be discussed later in the iceberg. But for right now, it should be noted that the ape shaman is the one who takes charge of the black substance. One reference I found really interesting within the show was the reference to the elephant graveyard urban legend in episode 3, A Cold Death. If you guys don't know what I'm talking about, the elephant graveyard is a famous real-life urban legend in which the oldest elephants in a herd go to a specific place to go off to when they reach a point in their life where they are near death. They go off to this specific place that's often described as sacred, and they see the end of their lives here, where other older elephants have done the same thing time and time again, hence why it is called an elephant graveyard. And if you remember from episode 3 of Primal, the elephant herd takes the tusk of the elderly mammoth back to a graveyard in which we see other remains and skeletons of other deceased mammoths, that have most likely traveled there to spend the rest of their time of life before inevitably passing away. But from what we've seen in episode 3, if there's a scenario in which a mammoth has died before being able to reach the graveyard due to unnatural causes or something of the sort, then the rest of the herd takes it upon themselves to retrieve whatever remains they can and take it to the graveyard as a way to honor their fallen herd member. And in terms of the real world urban legend, it's considered to be a myth at times, as older elephants instinctively traveling to a place they considered sacred enough to establish a graveyard for themselves to die in doesn't seem to be something that's 100% confirmed. If anything, it serves more as a theory to help possibly explain discoveries like the one made in Saxony-Anhalt, I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing that right, where 27 Paleoloxodon Antiquus skeletons were found in one area. In the case of the 27 Paleoloxodons, there's another interesting detail that I feel Primal also referenced in A Cold Death. And that's the fact that the tusks of the skeletons were missing, just like how Spear had taken the tusk of the elderly mammoth in that episode. And while this is also an interesting possible reference that Primal made, it may disprove the theory of an elephant graveyard, since with the tusks missing, it indicates a human presence was there and went out of their way to take the tusks. But this in itself is also just a theory, so who knows for sure. And as far as the elephant graveyard urban legend goes, it seems that some sources have concluded that it's fake while others are still open to theories revolving around it. But what do you guys think?
Oh boy, it's time to talk about Mira. So Mira was first introduced in the final episode of Season 1 Part 2, Slave of the Scorpion, where she met Spear and Fang and proceeded to tell them about her homeland. She starts to communicate with Spear through drawing in the dirt, telling him about her people and their enslavement at the hands of a different empire, leading to her being recaptured and taken away on a boat by the Scorpion guys. There's obviously a lot to talk about here, such as who the scary Viking dude she draws is, or why Mira speaks in Arabic, but I wanted to focus on how her departure from our main characters is setting up the third season of the show. Now, from what I've seen from theories online, many people believe that Spear and Fang will build a raft in an attempt to follow and rescue Mira, which is definitely possible. But another plot that I believe has a better chance of happening is what I'll refer to as the colonization plot. Basically how this would work would be instead of Spear and Fang building a raft and traveling to a new continent, the Scorpion people / empire would arrive with more boats, along with a spooky looking Viking barbarian guy we see Mira telling Spear about, because judging by his reaction, it's clear that a confrontation between the two is being set up. If you think about it, it makes sense that the Scorpion Empire would return to Spear and Fang's land instead of the pair traveling to theirs. I mean, why else would a boat with literal slaves on it be there in the first place? It's very likely that these guys are probably here to colonize and establish new territory with the assistance of slave labor, all being done by Mira's people. Following this theory, Season 3 in a nutshell would pretty much be about Spear and Fang confronting the Scorpion Empire and the Viking guy while also trying to reconnect with Mira and save their homeland. It's a huge jump from what we're used to viewing on the show, but it would definitely be cool to see these modern humans react to all the dinosaurs and creepy crawlies that our protagonists have to deal with 24/7. This next one is probably the most well-known fan theory that's ever been cooked up, which is that the witches are the ones responsible for creating the Plague of Madness. Now, even though this theory is popular and talked about a lot online, there's actually little evidence present in the show itself that backs it up. We see no reference to the plague in the episode Coven of the Damned, where the witches are introduced, which is pretty typical for the show, as Primal sort of follows the whole villain of the week structure, where Spear and Fang face a new threat each episode. So it's possible that the plague and the witches are just entirely separate entities separated by the sheer structure of the show, with little connection being made to anything throughout all of season 1. However, I think that this formula of disconnection is going to come to a close when the 3rd season of Primal eventually drops, because it's being set up in a way where we could be getting an overarching plot involving the Scorpion Empire facing off against Spear and Fang as they attempt to rescue Mira. Not only that, but the Plague of Madness along with the Mad Sauropod was shown to be one of the few things that truly scared both Spear and Fang, even going as far as showing that creepy nightmare sequence with their flesh melting off their bones. And since season 3 is setting up more of a consistent plot and eventual confrontation, as well as the Plague being a fan favorite iteration to the show, I think that it could be possible to see its return somewhere down the line, allowing us to be given some more insight into the source of the Plague and if it really did come from the witches. This would also act as some character development for both Spear and Fang, allowing them to face off against an old enemy and conquer their fears. Obviously this is all speculative, but it's also cool to imagine what our protagonists could be facing in future seasons and how the world and lore of Primal will expand.
Primal's original concept was much different than what it ended up becoming. Around 10 or so years ago, Genndy Tartakovsky came up with an idea that revolved around a little Astro Boy inspired character and his dinosaur companion. Tartakovsky would sketch these ideas out and would make different versions of this character and his dinosaur, with all of them having a very cartoon and kid-friendly design to it. But according to Tartakovsky, the idea didn't click with him at the time, and as a result, he scrapped it. Little did he know though, he would eventually revisit this idea later in his career.
And so then a few years passed and we were doing the Samurai Jack adult version, right? The last season, season 5. When that hit, everybody really responded to the sequences with no sound. And I started to think, what if we could do a whole show with just those sequences? And they generally had no dialogue. And then I started thinking about what idea what idea makes sense for this? And then the little kid on the dinosaur came up again.
So during the final season of Samurai Jack, the audience had responded well to the more mature tone the show had, along with its more quiet sequences that allowed the visuals and music to tell the story. Because of this, Tartakovsky didn't just want to go in this same direction with Primal, but he wanted to take it a step further. He wanted to take his former idea of a kid with his dinosaur companion and age them up, along with making the show more adult-oriented by making it more violent and have little to no dialogue. And originally, this was simply going to be a 7 to 10 minute short, but after the final season of Samurai Jack had finished, Tartakovsky would show his idea off to his team, and before he knew it, what would have been just a short film would eventually become a whole season of a show that would become known as Primal. One of the long-running mysteries in the first season of Primal comes from the 7th episode, where we're introduced to a rather strange enemy. The 7th episode, titled Plague of Madness, begins with a herd of Argentinosaurs roaming around their nesting grounds, when all of a sudden, a crazy-looking Parasaurolophus with green rotting flesh comes from the woods nearby and bites one of the Argentinosaurs. It's clear that the para had been infected with something that made it hostile and unpredictable, and when it bit the Argentinosaur, it had passed on that infection. And it wouldn't take long for it to take full effect over the poor Argentinosaurus. Soon its skin begins to turn green, it starts to vomit blood, and it becomes extremely hostile to the rest of its herd. And this would soon lead to a very brutal massacre that would scar many who watched this episode. This had all been caused by a plague, and the first instance of this plague that we saw was in the very beginning of the episode when we saw the para infected with it. But how the para became infected and where it even came from is unknown, as it literally comes out of nowhere in the beginning of the episode. And the plague itself works in a very strange way. In the beginning, it's indicated that the way it's passed on from host to host is physical contact, specifically being bitten by the creature infected with the plague. But soon after it was bitten, it's shown during the massacre that the infected Argentinosaur is biting some of its own members of the herd, yet they don't become infected. Instead, they just die immediately after. The only way I could explain this is that maybe the plague only takes effect on its victims if said victim is still alive. And even though there are instances of the infected Argentinosaur biting others, it bit them on the neck area, and the wound itself could have been enough to kill them, thus preventing the plague from taking its full effect. If this is the case, then that would throw one of the few theories that people have made around it out the window. And that's the fact that this plague is actually a virus that's turning the dinosaurs into zombies. But if they were trying to stick with the zombie formula, then that would mean the Argentinosaurs that were bitten should have been reanimated then, right? Yet they didn't, meaning that this plague is just making its victims sick and hostile, rather than killing them and making them come back from the dead as zombies. Or who knows, there's definitely more to the plague and there's more theories centered around it, one of which we talked about earlier in this video. And this is due to the lack of information we have on the plague itself and its origins, so I'm probably missing something for all I know. But what the plague also manages to show us is how vulnerable our main characters are, especially Spear. All throughout the season, we've seen Spear as someone who's seemingly not afraid of anything and is prepared to fight to the death in any given situation, no matter who or what he's going up against. Very few times do we see him fear something to the point where he feels the need to resort to his flight rather than his fight. And while this may drop the idea that he's this fearless hero of the show, it actually strengthens his development as a character. The kind of vulnerability that's displayed only emphasizes the fact that Spear is a human being, and like all human beings, he will naturally have fears. And while we've seen that his biggest fear throughout the show's run so far is losing his friend Fang, in this specific situation, it seems that his biggest fear is this infected dinosaur. And who could blame him? One of the strongest and largest terrestrial dinosaurs that's always been depicted as a gentle giant in pop culture media is now everyone's worst nightmare, as it no longer resembles a gentle giant but a bloodthirsty predator. And after being shown what this plague is capable of, it only made people want to know more about it, as the episode doesn't really give us a whole lot to work with. As far as a possible reappearance for the plague on this show, I'm not going to say it's impossible, but I think it's unlikely that it will be revisited. A lot of people actually want the plague to be revisited in this series, myself included, so we could get some more information and or closure about it and its origins. And like I said just now, even though it seems unlikely, it doesn't mean it's completely impossible for it to make a possible return in Season 2. Since Season 2 will be exploring other regions with advanced civilizations, it's possible that maybe the plague's origin came from this very society and was somehow spread overseas. But this is all just speculation. The chances of this happening may be slim, so for now the plague just stands as one of the show's greatest mysteries. The Scorpion's appearance in Primal is limited to a simple drawing that Mira makes of him in the sand. There's a sequence in the final episode in which Mira explains her story to Spear in her native language. As she explains her story, she draws pictures in the sand to give him a visual reference. And while I'm not familiar with whatever language she's speaking, what I can tell about this scene is that Mira explains that she and her tribe lived in peace before being invaded by a group of hostiles. This group then enslaved Mira and her tribe to take them overseas back to their homeland that's being ruled by a warlord that we know as the Scorpion. If you guys want a direct translation to this scene, I'll go ahead and link Altiori's video in the description down below, as she made a video specifically revolving around translating this scene. Anyways, we don't really know much about the Scorpion as he hasn't made a physical appearance in the show yet. What we do know, given from Mira's story and drawing, is that he is a larger, stronger being with an army of men who are extremely advanced and intelligent, as they are armed with long-range weaponry and travel overseas by boats. What makes this drawing weird to me though is the horns that protrude from his head. Do these horns represent headwear of some type, maybe like a helmet or something? Or is a scorpion a type of mythical creature that's worshipped by a society of advanced humans that are willing to do anything he orders them to do? I guess we'll just find out in the second season.
Okay, I know a lot of you have been waiting for this one, but it's finally time to talk about the Night Feeder. A fan favorite, this monstrous midnight assassin was armed with blinding speed and claws strong enough to cut straight through its victims. There's no doubt that it was one of the most dangerous creatures our heroes ever had the misfortune of encounter. But of course, Spear being the badass he is, along with some assistance from Fang, brought an end to the demonic dinosaur in a blaze of glory. Now there's a lot to unpack here, so let's go one step at a time. First off, the Night Feeder is one of the most terrifying and mysterious creatures in the whole show, simply due to the fact that you don't actually see what's been hunting our main characters until the very end of the episode. And even then, it's still hard to make out exactly what it looks like. It's a very similar tactic to how Steven Spielberg shot Jaws, with us getting perspective shots from the Night Feeder as it runs through the forest in order to quench its bloodlust, without actually showing us the animal itself. And it works great. It adds to the suspense of the scenes and it lets the viewer imagine what monstrosity could possibly be causing all this damage. Secondly, the Night Feeder's amazing camouflage seemed to be aided by a black oil-like substance that it coated its skin with, as this oil was easily seen stuck to Fang's snout after she attempted an attack on the theropod. The oil-like substance may also be the reason why it took the Night Feeder mere seconds to be engulfed in flames, as if it were really a substance in similar property to oil, this would also help the fire spread across its whole body extremely quickly. However, the presence of the black substance is important, as it could also be a huge connection to something we've already seen in the show. Fast forward to the middle of the episode, we get a quick shot of Spear and Fang observing a cute dinosaur, as it's referred to in the animatic pitch, briefly spooking the pair and running off into the forest. Now this scene was responsible for sparking a popular theory online that this tiny theropod was actually the Night Feeder itself, and that the dinosaur would undergo a werewolf-like transformation at night, under the moon's influence. This is believed mainly due to there being many different shots of the moon at night during the episode, as well as the Night Feeder never making an appearance during the day, so the evidence sort of adds up. But the nail in the coffin of this theory has to be the oily black substance that comes off the Night Feeder during Fang's attack. I mean, sure, it could just be using the oil for camouflage, but where else have we seen a black gooey substance that is shown to make animals transform into stronger psychotic versions of themselves? That's right, the black substance seen coated on the Night Feeder may be the same substance we see the ape shaman using in the episode Rage of the Apemen. There's plenty of evidence to back this up too, the first one being Fang's reaction to the oil getting on her snout. In response, she goes into a distress, roaring and snarling all over the place and whatnot. We've also been shown throughout the course of the show that Fang has a great sense of smell. She is a tyrannosaur after all. So wouldn't it make sense that what she's smelling is resurfacing a past memory that involved the scent of someone under the black substance's influence who was also about to kill her? More evidence for this theory is shown in Rage of the Apemen. When Spear drinks the black substance, we get a quick shot of the moon right before he transforms, in the same way that we get recurring shots of it in the Night Feeder. Spear's transformation not only causes him to turn into a monstrous version of himself, it also makes him go on an unstoppable rampage that ends in him slaughtering every last one of the Apemen, similarly to how the Night Feeder acts throughout the course of the episode. Another thing to note is that the black substance transformation only seems to work under the moon's power, as we see Spear return to his normal self after dawn, which would also be the case for the Night Feeder, where we see the small theropod the next morning after the first night. So yeah, this theory is pretty exciting to talk about because there's a lot of evidence that backs it up. The only things left unanswered would be how the small theropod came in contact with the black substance in the first place. I mean, if it was able to cover its entire body in it, it would have needed access to a large supply. A possibility could be that the black substance is more tar-like than oily, and the theropod maybe fell into a tar pit of the substance, resulting in its transformation and the reason why its skin is covered in it. It would also explain why it dies so quickly to fire, as tar is also extremely flammable. But yeah, that pretty much brings an end to this theory speculation. Would also like to credit Thylacine13, sorry if I butchered your name, for providing the nuts and bolts of the theory. But yeah, the Night Feeder is just a really cool and mysterious character all around, and I hope we can get some more insight on its origin in the future, whether it be from the creators themselves or even in a future season. Look at the clock, time to talk about the head witch in the Coven. The episode Coven of the Damned was a real game changer for Primal, as the concept was far more supernatural than anything we had seen before, with magic, mind control, time reversal, all that jazz. But it definitely sparked people's interests, as it introduced some crazy concepts and ideas for fans to speculate about. Who were the witches? Who was their leader? And what were their goals? Something that has been pointed out quite prominently is that the head witch and the Coven share a lot of similarities with the Cult of Aku and the High Priestess from the show Samurai Jack, which was also made by Genndy Tartakovsky. The cult is made up of only females who worship Aku, the main antagonist of Samurai Jack. The High Priestess, their leader, also gave birth to female succulents who she raised as assassins in order to kill Samurai Jack, similarly to how the head witch is the one who gives birth or procreates in order to make daughters for the witches. With these connections present, it's obvious that these characters may have influenced the creation of the head witch in our Coven, but let me assure you that they aren't simply copy and pasted over from one of Genndy's other shows, far from it. After doing some digging, I found out that the witches may have been inspired by traditional shamans. Now if you don't know what a shaman is, they're described as people who were able to achieve various supernatural powers by making contact with ancient spirits, and it is thought to have originated from various hunter-gatherer cultures, making it pretty damn ancient. The events that unfold throughout the episode and the practices the head witch and her coven undergo share a lot of similarities with shamanism, particularly what's referred to as classic North Asian shamanism, and there are many examples that make this apparent. Firstly, one of the traits of this shamanism was that the shamans were thought to be assisted by a spirit-like entity or group of spirits in the form of an animal when practicing magic, which could also act as a, quote, sexual partner. Now in Primal, we see that the witches reproduce by offering a sacrifice to the head witch, who transforms herself into an otherworldly, Wendigo-like spirit that drains the victim's life force, using it to procreate. Following the earlier shaman trait, this is quite similar in the way that the head witch transforms herself into a spirit-like entity in order to give birth, or making new life. life. Since she has to transform or to call upon this spirit to procreate, it's very similar to the idea of a spirit acting as a sexual partner to a shaman from North Asian shamanism. But that's not the only similarity we see. There's a lot more evidence presented in the show that links the witches and shaman practices together. Some examples would be how shamans were known to have animal familiars that would obey their masters, just like the Pteranodon mount we see the head witch using, as well as Lula taking control of Fang for most of the episode. It was also apparently one of the distinguishing traits of shamanism for two shamans to combat one another in animal form, with the outcome of this combat acting as well-being for the victor and destruction for the loser. Sound familiar? And lastly, these shamans were most famous for being able to enter the spirit world by harvesting the power of supernatural forces, similarly to how we see Lula sort of time traveling to glimpse at her own and other characters' past. So of all these connections, is it safe to say that shamanism had some presence in the creation of the head witch in the coven? Well, we can't say for sure, because it's not like the guys behind Primal to sit back and explain everything to us, am I right? But since the episode Coven of the Damned ended in a way where the witches could potentially make a return, I hope we get to see them again in the future, and possibly get some further insight into their origins.
I mentioned earlier that there are a ton of things shown within the animatics that look a lot different from their final products. A lot of these differences are very minor, and were probably only changed to help fit the story better for the episode. But one of the more striking differences is the episode 9 animatic, the Night Feeder. Throughout the whole season, Primal has explored different areas of horror, with some having a more violent and in-your-face kind of tone to it, like Terror Under the Blood Moon and Plague of Madness, while an episode like Coven of the Damned used a style of dramatic horror to tell a very depressing story about loss. But episode 9 ends up using paranoid horror as a way to keep the audience at the edge of their seats and terrified throughout the entire 20 minutes. And one thing that's essential with paranoid horror is to show as little as possible, as the whole point of this area of the horror genre is to rely on the unknown to terrify your audience, while at the same time showing them certain aspects of the unknown as a way to give them clues as to what it could be. And the show does a fantastic job with this, as throughout most of the episode, we aren't able to get a glimpse of the Night Feeder itself, yet we are shown what it's capable of. It's able to kill off entire herds of dinosaurs, move at incredible speeds, and is strong enough to destroy a whole tree with a single slash. These clues only make us more invested in wanting to know what this creature is and how it is able to cause such destruction. And eventually, the Night Feeder is revealed at the very end of the episode. After finding out its weakness of fire, Spear and Fang light the Night Feeder ablaze, revealing it to be some sort of theropod dinosaur, possibly a raptor of some type. But this reveal had left many feeling like this was a rather anticlimactic ending, as a dinosaur as the main enemy didn't feel like it was anything new. But despite this, it led to very interesting debates and speculation as to what it could actually be, and how it managed to have these different abilities. But all of this has already been talked about here. What makes this whole thing weird is the original concept for the Night Feeder and what it was actually going to be, because originally it wasn't going to be a dinosaur at all. This is what the Night Feeder looked like in the episode's pitch. And even from looking at this picture, I still don't really know what the original intention for the Night Feeder was at this point of the episode's development stage. And this is one of the many reasons why it's far down the list. Not only is it completely different from the Night Feeder we would all come to know, but it's also hard to tell what Tartakovsky and his team were going with this original idea. As far as the behavior goes, there wasn't anything new in the animatic that we didn't already see in the finished episode. In fact, the episode follows pretty much everything in the animatic, with the one noticeable difference being the Night Feeder's physical appearance. And given from the few shots we see of it, its build looks much more robust and sturdy, as it has a short neck, a small head, and thick arms with sharp claws. This is the most we can actually see of it, but regardless of our limited view, we can tell that it was clearly made to look more like a monster, whereas the second version was made to look more like a theropod dinosaur, and as a result, its build was much more slender. And it's possible that this was the very reason for the Night Feeder's change. As I mentioned before, we know that the Night Feeder moves really fast and can kill herds of dinosaurs at a time in a very quick and brutal fashion. It would make sense for the Night Feeder to have a more slender build to achieve this level of agility. It's clear that Tartakovsky wanted the Night Feeder to be some sort of monster, but maybe they just thought it would be a better idea to give it a different form that would fit more realistically with its given abilities. And this form would eventually take the shape of a raptor, or megaraptor, or some type of theropod dinosaur, giving us one of the show's most mysterious and terrifying yet memorable enemies. And that was the Primal Iceberg. Thank you all so much for watching. This was a very fun video to put together. I never made my own iceberg chart before, mainly because I was too lazy to, but it was actually really fun to do, especially with someone who loves the same topic of the chart as much as I do. And that reminds me, thank you so much to Pish for helping me out with this video. Pish wrote his own script for all the stuff he read out, and on top of that, he also made the intro for this video. So if you like his commentary and editing style, definitely go check his YouTube channel out where he plays dinosaur games and has dinosaur related discussions. And speaking of Pish, I'm really excited to tell you all that Pish and I have created our very own Discord server. If you join the server, Pish and I will acknowledge your existence. But seriously, if you want to suggest possible video ideas or get exclusive updates for either of our channels, or just want to chat with us about random things, then come join us on the server. It's simply meant for us to be able to interact with you guys easier. Also, while I haven't thought that far ahead, I also want to try to eventually put together some Discord exclusive events in the future, like Q&As and live streams and so on. Again, I haven't thought that far into the future, so I don't know if I'm going to be able to set all of this up, but just know that it is a possibility. So if any of that interests you, then come join the server because it'll be really fun. Alright, time to awkwardly transition from the scripted version of this video to the non-scripted version of this video. Thank you guys so much for watching this very long video that took me a very long time to edit through. In case you guys couldn't tell, I'm pretty tired. As fun as it is to put these videos together, it's also a handful at times. But quickly before we end the video, there are two things I wanted to announce that I completely forgot to put in the script. And that is, one, I'm almost at 10,000 subscribers, and two, I've almost reached my 5th year uploading here on YouTube. At the time that I'm recording this, I haven't reached these milestones quite yet, but this might be the last video that I make before I reach those milestones, because who knows when my next video is going to be uploaded. At this point, I don't have a schedule. It's just one of those things where it's done when it's done, you know? So just in case that happens, I just want to acknowledge these milestones now, and thank you guys in advance for not only helping me reach 10,000 subscribers, but making these 5 years on YouTube amazing, despite the fact that there were some obstacles here and there. But despite those obstacles, it's just the insane amount of support that really motivates me to make this kind of content for you guys. So I just want to thank you guys so much for that. And that's pretty much all I have to say for now. Thank you guys so much for watching this very long video. Thank you guys so much for everything that you've done for me in these last 5 years. And of course, thank you so much for helping me reach 10,000 subscribers. I have no idea if I'll reach either of those milestones by the time I get this video uploaded, and even if I don't, oh well, I don't care. I'm still gonna thank you guys. That's pretty much all I have to say for now. Thank you guys so much for watching, and please have a good day.